Hey everyone, it's Ivan, keepadventure.com. Out here to share a pretty cool conversation I was able to have sitting down with Mike, one of the owners of Sons of Liberty Gunworks. Real quick, before we dive in, this video is actually sponsored by NAGR, National Association for Gun Rights, a legit nonprofit grassroots organization that does meaningful work with respect to gun rights, advocates for everyone out there, to include getting constitutional carry passed in a number of different states and doing meaningful work, which is awesome. Think of them as doing what the NRA says they're going to do, but instead of like padding Wayne's pockets and getting a magazine that's going to sell you bullion, they actually do meaningful stuff with respect to gun rights. Pretty solid, right? Down below there's some links you can check out more, to include some giveaways. I think they're actually giving away like an APC, which is pretty cool. But we'll jump into this conversation. All right, thanks a ton for having me out. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I've been familiar with your guys' stuff for a while now. Kind of saw it last couple years, especially just seeing stuff too, like Chuck Pressburg and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, like taking notice. And yeah, no, kind of tell me how this thing started.
So around the time Sons of Liberty was, we stood it up, there were a couple of rifle companies that I thought were doing some neat stuff, like legitimately improving the 6920, right? And the 6920, I think, was the yardstick for guns. Because you had companies like BCM and DD and Noveski and those guys like legitimately making it better.
Improving upon,
right? Not going backwards, but
yes,
actually improving upon, taking those basic building blocks that we know are critical and improving upon that. And at the time, you could go buy a Daniel Defense or a BCM or one of these rifles off the shelf, and then you would get it home in your garage and start removing muzzle devices and furniture and fire control groups, and plug in stuff in to make it, more end user customizable. Well, our business model when we first started was to build high performance guns, guns that legitimately improved upon that platform, but make it end user customizable from the shop. You could go in there on a drop down menu and pick the fire control group, pick the muzzle device depending on what suppressor you might be using, or so on and so forth, and allow people to build guns like that, and then have it come straight from some of the best armorers in the country to your door. Which
is huge, because yeah, you buy a Glock, you're like, well, I'm definitely changing out sights,
right?
Maybe a disconnector, trigger, whatever it may be. But like, yeah, guns are pretty simple, and anyone can do it, but not anyone can do it right. And to be able to have something turnkey, what you want,
right,
that's actually with all the components you want, that's giant.
Yeah, I mean, like, timing muzzle devices and stuff for suppressor use, having all that concentration and everything figured out, just done right. That was one of the things that that was our original business model. Now, as we've evolved and as demand has grown, especially in these last 2 years, which has been crazy, we've put that on pause and we're doing more production stuff. But we do hope to open the customizable options back up at some point. That's the goal. That's why we started.
No, that's really cool. And again, like excellence in kind of the basics on a certain level, to include components, QC, all that stuff. So to that end, we should probably touch on your guys' bolt carrier groups. I will say, random experience of mine, we were actually training at, I think at the time they had changed the name to U.S. Training Center or something like that, like Blackwater basically.
Right.
Like we were doing a vetting course there for when I was doing security work. We had all these brand new guns, and we had like 6 bolts break over the course of like a weekend. And like, you don't really think about it until it happens, and you're like, I do not want this to happen. I mean, I'm glad it happened there versus somewhere else, but like unacceptable.
Yeah, so when you start deviating from a formula that works, you get into less predictability of performance. And for us, we were kind of a return to fundamentals as a brand, because we know this formula works. And if you look at military rifles, you're talking about 60 years of collective data, sample sizes of millions, round counts of billions, in every austere condition you can think of, from your Delta Force operator to your 17-year-old ASFAB waiver. If you hand them a military rifle, the thing is going to work, and you really don't see premature bolt failure. You don't see a lot of the problems that you see out here in the civilian world, where there is no standard, right? So I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. What I wanted to do was look at the formula that we knew worked. Individual high pressure testing, 158 Carpenter steel, the torque values for set screws, the internal diameter of gas keys, the way a bolt tail run, the dimensional correctness of all that stuff, and really do that and deliver that to the end user. And it makes all the difference. I mean, yeah, we deviated in the spot of, like, say, an extractor spring, if you will. If you were to boil the entire cycle of operation of this gun down to 2 steps, it's going to be make a hole and then fill it, right? So instead of using Crane O-rings like the copper colored spring, we went to that 5-coil XP spring made by Springco. That brass is coming out, so the make a hole part of the cycle is going to happen. And then heavy buffers, powerful springs in the back, you're going to fill it. And when you focus on those 2 things for a fighting gun, you make a gun that's very, very hard to stop.
Yeah, like you build in reliability at the end of the day.
Yeah, so our shtick is, our approach basically is the thing must work. And I put reliability above all else, even more so than chasing some crazy accuracy demon or
100. People get so down the rabbit hole on that, and it's like, are you shooting off a concrete bench? Like, maybe this isn't the gun you want. I don't know, but how are you going to use this?
And so for us, if you look at reliability above all else, yes, I believe that we can make guns lighter and faster and more comfortable and cool looking and all that kind of stuff, just not at the expense of reliability. No. We want to put that first, and that was the premise. I mean, that's our philosophy. That's how we approach this gun. We look at every gun as if it's going to be potentially suppressed. We want the gun to be ready to accept a suppressor. Bang, 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 take the suppressor off. Bang, bang, bang. Not need to adjust or modify anything. That's how I believe a fighting gun should be.
And you guys, in part, control that with like gas port size and things like that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, gas port size, understanding that relationship between gas port, dwell time, the internal volume of the gas tube you're trying to fill, and then of course the buffer weight and action spring in the back. And when you do to one side, you do the other. And if you have adequate gas and ample mass, that's how the gun's going to drive. And I mean, the results speak for themselves. They function even through adversity. You don't want a gun gassed so conservative that it's on the ragged edge of working, to where if you introduce anything
to slow it down, bunch of carbon,
dry, climate, weather, anemic ammo, so on and so forth. Like, if you introduce anything to that gun, just because it's working in optimal conditions, we want the gun to work in less than optimal conditions. And so you have to understand that relationship. Furthermore, the way I look at it is it's an operational envelope. So you want ample and adequate gas, not so much gas to where whenever you add a suppressor, you push it beyond the operational envelope. Yeah. But enough gas to where it's going to plow through adversity. And it's not just gas, and you have to understand mass at the back end too. But that's how we build the gun, and they work. They do what they're supposed to do.
No, that's awesome. I mean, designed with that in mind, like reliability first and foremost, which, depending on what you're doing, it's a pretty important thing.
Yeah, no, it really is. Like, again, I think if most people took that approach to reliability above all, they'd be ahead of the game. And those are mostly your performance brands. If you look at your performance brands, we all have some of that stuff in common, and how we didn't pull these values, out of the air,
No, for sure. I had a opportunity. Well, actually, I guess still on the bolt carrier. Going back to testing in QC, I was out here, I had the opportunity. Some of your guys went out from the shop and went to go test bolt carrier grips, whether they were going in your guns or they were getting sold as like standalone bolt carrier groups. But yeah, like rounds and rounds and rounds, like going through and shooting rounds, making sure that they work, making sure they lock back reliably. And then, yeah, like watching, I think while I was there, out of 2 or 3 boxes getting tested, like one of them got pulled, like, nope, didn't work reliably. Another magazine, still no, pulled out, marked, and it'll either get troubleshot or just thrown in the scrap heap and like done.
We reject a lot of stuff, you know. I mean, BCGs go through test fire after assembly and inspection, and if it doesn't pass, I mean, part of what you're paying for with your better brands is their rejection rate. The fact that not everything passes is kind of what separates the brand sometimes. Is the fact that we'd rather catch it here than the end user, you know, catch it somewhere else. And sometimes it's a phosphate issue being heavy, or sometimes there's some other kind of thing going on, but we reject it, go sort it out, and that's why there's so many redundant test fire steps, right? The BCG itself is test fired, the upper half is test fired, the complete weapon system is test fired, and then it goes to a completely separate set of eyes, and that work is inspected and test fired again. I don't want the guy who built the gun to necessarily be inspecting the gun.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to build out a gun, and yeah, ended up, one, it was already test fired, the bolt carrier group, then end up getting the thing, test fired again, goes over to QC, someone else is basically checking everything, test fired again, and yeah, like then it gets a stamp, like after passes through all those hands.
Yeah, and we're looking for specific things. Yeah, that last round hold open, that's a big part of the diagnostic thing for, you know, gassing and other things, and then of course the angle at which something's ejecting, the distance at which something's ejecting. I mean, all of that stuff is telling you what's going on with the gun. If you see brass like trickling out at your feet or something, that could be telling you that you have an ejector issue. So while a lot of times I'll see guys say, you know, on videos that, oh yeah, my gun runs flawless. Well, you know, for those of us that do this for a living, you can see like, well, the gun's cycling as of right now, but it's most certainly not flawless, because I can see that you're heading towards the cliff. I can see that like there's very anemic ejection on there, and your ejector spring might be dying. you don't have to wait till it fails to address it. You know?
Right?
Yeah.
No, 100%. And I was fortunate to see this M89 at SHOT Show, and again, I think it's cool because you guys are looking at places for incremental improvement, and found one, I guess, with this. And so, yeah, give me a rundown on this guy.
So, for the people familiar with our M76 wedge lock rails, I mean, they're a solid rail, very, very solid, robust rail. We saw an opportunity to make that design, you know, just a little bit better. One of the things we did was we opened up the ID of that rail to give the gas block a little bit more room. So whenever you're mounting things with M-LOK around the gas block, you're giving that gas block just a little bit more room. That was something I wanted to do. Plus that slightly larger ID helps it take a little bit longer to heat up under heavier firing schedules. The extrusion itself is very robust, very heavy, and then of course that steel barrel nut and the design of that barrel nut again gives it a lot more rigidity. And here's the thing. This thing might be overkill for certain shooters. It was designed with deflection and, you know, rigidity in mind. So guys using IR lasers, guys using certain enablers. Now anybody can use it. I just, you know, if you're never going to run an IR laser, it might be a little bit overkill. The neat thing about this is it has 3 independent wedges working together. So every time one of those fasteners or those set screws are tightened, you have 3 independent wedges driving that rail back into the upper receiver, and it's giving it, you know, a very, very solid lockup.
Almost creating like a monolithic.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it feels, and when people handle them, it's you can tell. It's just, I think it's the stoutest thing out there. Again, our M76 rails, we're still offering those. I think these are just the next step in the evolution of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I do shoot with like lasers and night vision, and you can't get over how important a rigid rail is, like once you start doing that. And especially if you start doing anything dynamic, shooting around things, because, oh, like, don't push this against something. Okay, that's great until I need to, because situationally, like, that's where I'm at right now. And so having something rigid to where you're not going to end up, like shifting zeros or anything like that. And then also just design elements as far as like, where do we need M-lock because I'm going to actually attach things up here, versus like, where do I not need M-lock and create like venting.
Yeah, so when we released photos of this, there were people that asked me why we did not have, M-lock in positions back here at the, 1 or 11 o'clock. And I'm thinking, well, who's mounting?
What are you putting there?
What are you putting there, right? So mechanically, and like, that's where that's my level of experience and expertise. I mean, mechanically, I can tell you how to make these guns work, right? But then we have guys like Chuck Pressburg and Steve Fisher and Aaron Cowan and a bunch of the shooters that help us with the input on where things should be, that man-machine interface, right? Like how this thing is going to be deployed in a practical sense. And so we take that feedback and we put stuff where intuitively it probably should go. I mean, even in some of these relief cuts here for like your hands where they go, that's mechanics, that's my field, and I defer to the shooters when they tell me kind of where things ergonomically should be. And I think when you put those two skill sets together, you get something pretty cool.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's very cool. Well, like some of the things that for me I've definitely appreciated and found like interesting is, one, just seeing the why behind some of the things. And I mean, even stuff like barrels, like you guys get your barrels from Ballistic, right?
Mm-hmm. Ballistic makes our barrels.
But, they're made for you to your spec.
Yeah, there's a misconception in this industry that knowing where something comes from tells you everything you need to know. And this isn't a knock at Ballistic at all. I think they do good stuff. But we're telling them the specifications for the barrel. And I'll it's not exactly a secret. I mean, FN produces barrels for Palmetto State Armory. FN produces barrels for, BCM. Does that mean that a PSA barrel equals a BCM barrel?
Right.
I would argue that's probably not the case. And that's not a knock on anybody or whatever.
No.
I'm saying that,
they're made to a different spec.
They're made to a different spec.
100%.
So we specify certain things, and one of those things we're looking for is something as simple as like the actual true gas block journal, that coincides with like the internal diameter of a gas block. You start looking at, and of course at gas ports, and you start looking at a lot of the different things. It's the level of checking the boxes of
attention to detail.
That we feel is important. I remember independently doing research on this, and also a lot of our own testing whenever you were comparing different techniques for making barrels, and I was interested to see that if you started with the correct materials, that there was overlap, and despite what technique was being used to make that barrel in terms of service life. Service life is also one of those things that's really difficult to define, and even among
shooting schedule,
firing schedules, the types of ammunition, blah, 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 so on and so forth. I'm aware of no company that will guarantee at least a minimum round count. And there's a reason for that, and it's because it's so hard to predict what that could be. So for us, what we do is we tell people that once your group exceeds what you think is acceptable, we will replace the barrel. We will, no questions asked, replace a barrel that's been shot out. And I did that almost as like a carnival game, because it's very, 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 very hard to shoot one out. It legitimately is, and I make that offer not because I'm in the business of just giving away free barrels, but because I want people to have a level of confidence in kind of, this is where the academic side and the practical side kind of separate. People argue about what's better here and there, right? And as a guy that manufactures and sells thousands and thousands of guns, and before that serviced thousands and thousands of guns from every manufacturer you can think of. We have a high degree of confidence in the longevity of these barrels, and I'm not worried about it. So I invite people, and I'll be reading the comments, so I invite people to go find objective data that can tell you what service life is on one process versus the other. And I think you'd be surprised if you're looking for true objective data on what the results are. You'll be surprised if you really go search for it.
No, not surprised. I mean, there's so many variables that, like, to try and nail it down. I mean, if there's a spec, it's going to be for this barrel length with this firing schedule with this ammo, blah blah blah. Like, it'll be super narrow because there's so many variables.
Well, even within like the same lot, if you were to take a group of identical barrels, same everything, and you were to shoot them, even the results within those identical barrels
really
varied quite a bit.
Damn.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I was very surprised when we started really delving into that, because I thought that there would be a legitimate gap in between certain things. Now, for stainless steel untreated barrels versus like your 4150 CMV or your MIL-B-1159 Echo, like your military grade ordnance steel, between stainless steel and those materials, there is a difference for sure. It comes down to the material. But between your like hammer forge versus your button rifle versus your QPK versus your chrome line, starting with the correct material, I was very surprised to see the overlap there, and it's really not as definitive as anybody would think.
Interesting.
I found that to be really interesting. That's a conversation in and of itself that, some people accept certain things as dogma. You'd be surprised when you saw the
people
results.
repeat ideas, and then it becomes what everyone repeats.
Yeah, even like I said, even I was legitimately surprised. So.
That's very cool.
And we're extremely transparent about who OEMs for us about everything. For me, that was one of the things I wanted to do from the jump, was there's no secret sauce. Like, this is the formula that we use. This is why we use this buffer weight. This is why we use this spring. This is why we adhere to this material here, and then this torque value here. And we're very open about that because we're a performance-driven brand, and I think all of those things collectively, when you put them together, make a difference.
No, 100%. And I mean, the idea of a company making everything in-house, like, okay, are you going to be a spring company? Probably not. And if you are, you're going to make crap springs.
Yeah, I can't make a better spring than Alan from Springco, so I'm not going to try. And honestly, I can't machine bolts better than Microbest with that level of consistency over large numbers. That's another thing that people have to understand too. Maintaining that level of QC and consistency over large numbers, that is where I think a lot of the better brands really deserve a lot of respect, because they're able to do that year after year, thousands after thousands.
Yes.
Where if you grab a rifle off of a rack in 2019,
known quantity,
in Arizona, or you go grab a rifle off the rack at a store in Idaho in 2021, and you were to inspect the gun, they are almost indistinguishable, because there's a level of consistency, and there's a formula that your better brands do not deviate from.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. But awesome, man. I appreciate you having me out, man.
Yeah,
it's been really cool.
And we've talked about some of the stuff that separates us in terms of performance and materials, but I think one of the things that's really neat about Sons Liberty is also the end user support that we have. So I mentioned it with barrels. If somebody shoots a barrel out, we replace it. Gas rings or any wear item. I've replaced guns that were destroyed in house fires. If one of these rifles is used in a defensive scenario and that rifle's taken for evidence, we replace it.
Which is huge, because if you don't know, the gun will get taken.
Oh yeah.
And it'll get taken for a while, whether law enforcement or otherwise, like as a civilian too. Like, it's going away for a while.
Yeah, and I've heard people say things like, well, I didn't buy a good rifle because if I ever had to use it, I would lose it in that scenario. And I thought that was a really terrible reason not to have the best equipment that you could put forward in a life or death scenario. But that's the other thing too. We've grown geometrically as a brand, but I'm still very accessible. We're still very accessible. I like talking to shooters. I still give my cell phone number out, and I want people to know, like Sons Liberty customers, that you basically have a gun concierge. Like we're in this together. You chose to spend your hard-earned money with us, and we are going to do all we can to support you and take care of you.
That is awesome. I will say something that really came across here building is the level of attention to detail, and with that, basically the QC. I mean, even speaking of the bolt, like bolt getting fired to be initially tested on the range, and then like, okay, well, this bolt's going to go in a gun. So building the gun, shooting the gun, like, all right, cool. Going to QC, another set of eyes, getting shot again, like finally signed off. And just I mean, at the end of the day, if someone takes this, goes and shoots it, throws it down on the gravel, like, it'll get beat up.
Yeah.
But the level of detail, just even like cosmetically making sure it's leaving in pristine condition, like, pretty amazing.
Yeah, so people have a high expectation of Sons Liberty. So when they open that box, I want them to really love their gun, and I want to meet or exceed their expectations. I mean, and we expect the gun to be cosmetically flawless. There are plenty of parts that sometimes we reject because there is a slight variation in the anode. Mechanically it doesn't matter, but still, somebody chose to spend their hard-earned money with us. I want them to be able to open that box and really love what they're, what they got. And so that to me was that's part of the QC process. It's not just mechanical. It's also, and these guns are beautiful. I mean, if you're familiar with our anodizing and stuff, there's not a lot out there quite like it. It's a beautiful gun.
It's very cool. Yeah, no, I'm excited to go shoot mine.
Hey man, I've been a big fan, so it's really cool to have you here.
I appreciate being able to be here, man. It's been really cool, but thank you again.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Really grateful for the opportunity to go out there and see what makes Sons of Liberty Gunworks, Sons of Liberty Gunworks, and sit down and talk with Mike. Really cool guy, and one thing I really appreciate is he lives it. Incredibly outspoken advocate for gun rights, which is awesome. And some people just don't recognize that maybe there is this continuous fight and struggle for gun rights. And so it's really important that people are out there advocating, whether it's Mike or National Association for Gun Rights, people out there doing good work and trying to maintain our freedoms, which is greatly appreciated. But as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.